The nurse at the emergency room desk would not let me back to see my own wife. She put her hand up, polite and firm, and she said the words that took the floor out from under me. She said, "Sir, her husband is already back there with her." I told her I was her husband. I had my 2 kids standing right behind me, white as paper, because we'd just gotten the call that their mama had been in a wreck. And this nurse looked at her screen and looked at me, and something moved across her face that I have seen since only in people who realize they've walked into the middle of something they want no part of. Because the man back there with my wife, the man the whole staff had been treating like her family, the man listed in their own system as the person to call, was not me. He was a nurse who worked in that very building, and every person behind that desk had known the 2 of them as a couple for the better part of a year. I found out my marriage was over standing in a hospital lobby in front of my teenagers, from a stranger who felt sorrier for me than I'd ever felt for myself. Stay with me, because I did not fall down, and I did not make a scene. And what I did instead, slow and quiet and lawful, is the reason I walked away with my business, my house, my children, and my name. And she walked away with the one thing she'd chosen. Where are you watching from today? I want to know who's out there. And stay to the end, because the last thing I figured out, up on a roof of all places, is the thing I'd hand to any man who's ever told himself the house at home was fine because the lights were still on. My name is Bo. I'm 49, and I've put roofs on houses in upstate South Carolina since I was a teenager. I run my own small crew, my own trucks, my name on the side of them. I was married to Tonya for 21 years. We had 2 kids, a daughter named Maddie who was 17 and getting ready to leave for college, and a son named Ben who was 14. I'm going to tell you how a man who spends his life keeping the water out of other people's houses let his own quietly rot from the inside, and how I finally read the leak right, and what it cost the woman who caused it. Let me start with the trust, because you can't see the damage if you don't know what was holding the place up. I was a provider. I built that into the bones of who I am, the same way my daddy built it into me. Roofing is hard, ugly, dangerous work. You're up on a deck in the South Carolina summer where the shingles will cook the soles right off your boots. And you're up there in the spring when the hail comes through and the whole county needs a new roof at once. And you work yourself half to death because that's when the money is, and a man feeds his family when the feeding's good. I left before dawn most mornings, and a lot of nights I didn't come down off the last roof until the light was gone. I told myself that was love. I told myself a man who works himself raw to keep a good house over his family's head has earned a wife who's glad to see his truck pull in at night. I started with 1 ladder and a borrowed nail gun and a truck I prayed over every cold morning. I worked under another man for years, learning the trade right, learning that a roof isn't shingles, it's a system. It's flashing and underlayment and valleys and the 100 places water tries to sneak in that a careless man never thinks about. When I finally went out on my own, I about starved the first 2 winters, because roofing dries up when it's cold, and you eat in the summer what you saved against the winter. Tonya stood with me through that. I'll always give her that. She waited tables and then got on at the hospital, and we made the truck payment together more than 1 month by the skin of our teeth. We were a team when we had nothing. That's the part that's hardest to square with how it ended, because the woman who left me in that lobby was the same woman who once sat in a cold truck with me, planning a life. People change in the dark, while you're up on a roof not watching. By the time the kids were teenagers, I had 3 trucks and a crew of good men, some of them with me 10 years. Hail season would hit and the phone wouldn't stop, and I'd be out from before the sun till after dark for weeks running. Climbing, measuring, fighting the insurance adjusters for honest homeowners. Coming home so wrung out I'd eat standing up at the counter and fall asleep before the 10 o'clock news. I was proud of that exhaustion. I wore it like a man wears a thing he's earned. It never once occurred to me that every one of those long days was a day I wasn't looking at my own wife, and that a marriage, like a roof, doesn't fail all at once. It fails one unwatched season at a time. And Tonya worked too. She had a job at the regional hospital, in admitting, registering patients, and over the years she'd picked up more and more evening shifts. I was proud of her for it. We were a two-income house, climbing out of the place we'd started, which was nothing, which was a rented single wide, and a baby on the way, and me, 25 years old, praying the truck would crank in the cold. We'd built something real from that. A brick house with a metal roof I put on myself, the best roof in the county. I used to joke, because the roofer's own house better not leak. 2 kids nearly raised. I thought we were coming up on the good part. The part where the nest empties out and you finally get to look at each other again and remember why you started. I want to tell you about a thing I waved off about 2 years before, because it's the same mistake I see good men make over and over. There'd been a name that came up too much, a fellow from her work, and a couple of late nights that didn't quite add up. And once a text I saw the top of, before her phone went face down, that didn't read like something a co-worker sends. I asked her about it, careful, and she got hurt and angry, and said after 20 years, was I really going to accuse her over a work friend? And I felt ashamed for asking, and I let it go. I patched over it. A roofer ought to know better than anybody that the spot you patch and never check again is exactly the spot that's going to let the whole ceiling come down on you 2 years later. I knew it about houses. I refused to know it about my own marriage. The signs after that were all there, and I had an answer for everyone, because she handed me one with everyone. The evening shifts grew. She was at the hospital later and later, and there were nights she texted that they were short-staffed and she'd be home past midnight. And I believed her, because I knew what it was to work late, and I wasn't going to be the husband who begrudged his wife an honest day. There was a closeness she had with her work that I couldn't be part of. A whole world of names and inside jokes from that building. And when one of those names was Derek, a little more than the others, I told myself a workplace is a family of its own, and that was natural. There was a phone that lived face down now with a passcode on it, and she said it was because the kids got into her things. There was money, here and there, that didn't track, and she said scrubs and gas and lunches added up. There was a softness gone out of our bed that I blamed on 21 years, and exhaustion, and my own tired body falling onto the couch every night. I had a long answer ready for all of it. I had a ceiling with a brown ring spreading across it, and I kept telling the family it was an old stain. She got new with herself, too, in ways I told myself were good. She started taking better care of herself, new clothes, the gym, a different way of doing her hair, and I was glad of it. I told her she looked beautiful, because what kind of a man isn't glad his wife feels good in her own skin? She went on a girls' weekend a few hours away that she came back from quiet and far away, and I figured she was just worn out from the driving. One of the men on my crew mentioned to me one afternoon, not thinking a thing of it, that he'd seen Tonya out at a restaurant across the county, having lunch with some fellow from the hospital. And I told him that's nice. She works with good people. And I meant it when I said it. That's how deep the trust ran. And that's how blind it made me. A man will explain away anything to keep from climbing up to look at the part of the roof he's scared to find soft. Every one of those signs had a clean answer riding right behind it. That's how it works. A slow leak never shows itself in a downpour. It shows in the quiet, in a faint ring that spreads so slow you can look at it every day and swear it isn't growing. By the time you can't pretend anymore, the water's already found the rafters. I want you to hold onto the hospital, by the way, that building where she worked, because the very place she built her second life is the place it all came down, in front of God and everybody. And there's a hard justice in that I didn't plan and couldn't have written. It was a Tuesday night, near 11, and I'd just come down off a long day and was half asleep on the couch when the phone rang. It was the hospital. There'd been a car accident. Tonya had been in a wreck and was being brought into the emergency room, and I should come. My heart went straight up into my throat, the way any man's would, and I got the kids up. Because Maddie was 17 and Ben was 14, and they were not going to sit home, not knowing if their mama was alive. We drove to that hospital with me praying out loud and the kids quiet and scared in the truck. And not one cell in my body was thinking about anything but, please let her be okay. She was okay. I'll tell you that now so you're not carrying it. The wreck was minor, a fender bender at a light. She was bruised and shaken and nothing worse. But here is the thing the phone call didn't tell me. She had not been at work. She had not been coming home from a late shift. The accident happened a little before 11 at night, in a part of town she had no reason to be in, and she had not been driving. She'd been in the passenger seat of a car that belonged to a nurse from her hospital named Derek. The two of them coming back from wherever two people go on a Tuesday night they've lied to everyone about. So when I walked up to that emergency room desk with my two scared kids behind me and said I was there for my wife, Tonya, the nurse at the desk froze. Because back behind those doors, holding my wife's hand, giving her information to the staff, being treated by everyone there as the man in her life, was Derek. In the building where they both worked, where everybody already knew them. I will not ever forget the look on that desk nurse's face, the pity in it, as she tried to figure out how to tell a man in front of his children that the husband already at his wife's bedside wasn't him. I did not yell, I want you to know that, because everything that came after depended on it. My daughter started to cry, and my son's face went hard, in a way no 14-year-old's face should ever have to. And I put a hand on each of them. And I told them, very quietly, we're going to be all right. And we are going to be people we're proud of tonight. Then I asked the desk nurse to please tell my wife that her children were here and would like to see her, and that I would be in the waiting room. And I sat down in a plastic chair under those buzzing lights with my arm around my crying daughter. And I did the only thing 25 years of roofs had taught me to do when you finally find the leak. I went still. And I started, in my head, to figure out exactly where the water had really been coming in, and exactly what it was going to take to make it right. I want to be honest with you about those minutes in that lobby, because they were the hardest of my life. And I think they're where the whole thing was won or lost. Every instinct I had was screaming to get up, to go back through those doors, to put my hands on that man, to make a scene the whole county would talk about for years. I am a big man who works with his body, and there was a part of me that wanted to let 21 years of trust come out of me all at once, right there. But Ben was watching me. My boy was watching to see what a man does when the floor falls out from under him. And Maddie was crying into my shoulder. 17 years old, about to go out into the world and decide what men are. Whatever I did in that lobby, my kids were going to carry it for the rest of their lives. So I sat still. I held my daughter. I told my son, low, that the worst thing a man can do is let somebody else's wrong turn him into something his children can't respect. And we waited. It was the hardest roof I ever stood on, that plastic chair. And I never moved a muscle wrong. And I have never been prouder of anything I didn't do. Tonya came out eventually, walking on her own. And the look on her face when she saw me sitting there with the kids told me she knew that I knew, and that there was no story left to tell. She tried anyway, later that night, at the house. She said it wasn't what it looked like. She said Derek was just a friend who'd given her a ride. And I let her talk, because I'd already decided I wasn't going to learn the truth from her mouth. I was going to learn it the way I learn everything that matters, by tracing it back myself, with proof, slow. The next morning I called a lawyer. Her name was Patricia, and she'd practiced family law in our part of the state for a long time. And she told me some things about South Carolina that turned the worst night of my life into something I could actually stand on. In South Carolina, she said, adultery isn't just a sad fact. It's a fault ground, and it carries real weight. First, she said, It gets you out fast. Most folks in this state have to live separate for a whole year before they can divorce. Adultery waives that. Prove it, and you don't have to wait. Second, and this was the one that mattered. In South Carolina, a spouse who commits adultery is barred from receiving alimony. Not reduced, barred. Tonya worked part-time hours, and I was the earner. And for 21 years, the quiet assumption, the thing she'd said out loud more than once, was that if it ever came apart, she'd be taken care of. Patricia told me that proven adultery took that off the table completely. That the law would not make me pay a dime of alimony to a wife who'd done what she'd done. And third, she said, marital misconduct is something the judge has to weigh when he divides everything up, which meant the affair could move the property split in my favor. More to me. Less to me of the debt. And the business, she said, the roofing company, that was mine. I'd started it before I ever met Tonya, kept it in my name, kept its books, its own. As long as I'd never folded it into the marriage in a way that turned it into shared property, it stayed mine, free and clear, every truck and every account. I asked her what could go wrong, because a man who works on roofs always wants to know where the job can go bad before he climbs up. She told me the truth. She said the biggest danger wasn't Tonya's lawyer or the judge. It was me. It was that a decent man, a man who fixes things, would be worked on, hard, by 21 years of marriage and 2 kids and a wife crying at the kitchen counter. And that most men in my spot talk themselves into one of 2 mistakes. They either blow up, do something ugly that hands the other side a story about how unstable and controlling they are, or they go soft and fold, take her back out of love or loneliness or guilt, and lose everything the law would have given them. The men who win, she said, are the rare ones who can hold steady in the middle, neither cruel nor weak, for as long as it takes. I told her I spend my life holding steady on a steep pitch in the wind. She said, then you might just be all right. So I built the case the way I'd assess a roof, careful and complete. The police report from the accident, with the time and the location and his name on it as the driver and hers as the passenger. The months of late shifts I could now lay against the hospital's actual schedule, where it turned out she'd clocked out hours before she came home on more nights than I could count. The phone bill, which told its own story in the shape of who she talked to at midnight. I didn't need to chase any of it through a keyhole. The truth had already walked out into the open under those emergency room lights. My job now was just to gather it up neat and keep it dry until it was time. Then she gave me the rules. And they were the same rules I'd give a homeowner who's just found a leak and wants to start ripping into the ceiling that minute. Slow down. Don't do anything rash. Don't move out of the house. In a custody and property fight that can hurt you, don't touch the joint accounts or do anything a court will see as you punishing her. Because the judge hates that, and it makes the wronged man look like the guilty one. Document everything. The wreck happened in his car, at an hour and a place she'd lied about, and that, she said, is what we call proof of opportunity and inclination, the 2 things South Carolina wants for adultery, and you could not buy cleaner proof than a police accident report putting your wife in another man's car at 11 at night. And then she told me the one thing I had to be most careful about. And it's a strange one, and it nearly tripped me anyway. She said, Beau, do not reconcile with her. Do not take her back. Do not resume the marriage, not even for a night, not even out of weakness or loneliness or for the kids, until this is done. Because South Carolina has a thing called condonation. If you forgive the adultery and take her back, knowing what she did, the law can treat it as forgiven, and you can lose the right to use it. The very mercy in you, she said, is the thing she'll reach for to take away your strongest card. Stay kind, stay decent, but do not, under any circumstances, take her back into that marriage until the papers are signed. I have to tell you about the weeks that nearly undid all of it. Because I think any man who's loved a woman for 2 decades will understand how close I came. Because Tonya did not fight me with anger. She fought me with the 21 years. She cried at the kitchen counter and said she'd made the worst mistake of her life, that Derek meant nothing, that she'd been lonely on all those nights I was up on a roof and she'd let it go somewhere it never should have. She talked about Maddie leaving for college and how she didn't want our daughter's last memories of home to be a broken one. She talked about all of it, the single wide and the baby and the truck that wouldn't crank, our whole life. And she asked me, with tears on her face, if I was really going to throw 21 years away over one terrible mistake. And God help me, there were nights I wanted to. Not because I'm weak, because I'm a man who keeps things. I fix what's broken. That's my whole nature. And everything in me wanted to climb up and patch this the way I've patched 10,000 roofs. For about 2 weeks, I let her sleep down the hall, and I felt myself bending toward her. Toward the old life. Toward the easy thing. What pulled me back was a roof, oddly enough. I was up on a job that second week, replacing a ceiling some homeowner had let go too long, and I pulled back the drywall and found the whole deck rotted black, soft as a sponge, because somebody had patched the visible stain for years instead of finding where the water actually got in. And the water never gets in where the stain shows. It runs downhill along the wood and drips out somewhere lower. So the brown ring on your ceiling is always lying to you about the real hole. I stood up there with a fistful of rotten wood, and I understood that I'd been about to do to my marriage what that homeowner did to his house. Patch the part I could see, take her back, paper over the stain, and let the rot keep spreading in the dark until the whole thing came down on my kids, some worse day down the road. The mercy she was asking for wasn't a repair. It was a fresh coat of paint over a deck that was already gone. I came down off that roof and I called Patricia, and I told her I was ready to do this all the way, the right way, and I never wavered again. I think about that rotted deck a lot, even now. Because the homeowner who owned that house wasn't a bad man. He just kept choosing the cheap, easy comfort of believing it was only a stain year after year. Because the truth meant tearing the whole ceiling open, and that was expensive and hard and frightening. And that is exactly what Tonya was offering me, and exactly what a big part of me wanted to take. The cheap comfort. Believe it was just a stain. Believe Derek meant nothing. Believe one terrible mistake. Believe we could paint over 21 years and live under it. But I'd torn open too many of those ceilings in my life not to know what was behind that one. A man who'd lie to a stranger to get a ride home from another man's bed had already let the rot run a long way through the wood. You don't rebuild on a deck that's gone soft. You tear it out and you put down something honest, even when it costs you, even when it breaks your heart to do it. I also did the one careful thing I needed to do before things moved. Tonya had started talking about taking some money out for a lawyer, and I noticed the savings start to thin, and on Patricia's word, I made copies of every account and every record. The rec report, the months of so-called late shifts I could now line up against nothing. And I got it all somewhere safe before any of it could disappear. You get the proof up out of the weather before you start tearing into the job. That's just sense. When we were ready, I filed, on the fault ground of adultery, with proof you could not argue with. There was no big dramatic scene, because the dramatic scene had already happened under those buzzing emergency room lights with my kids beside me. This part was quiet. It was paperwork and a hearing, and the truth laid out flat. The accident report put her in his car at 11 at night. The hospital, the very building they'd been so bold in, was full of people who'd seen them together for a year. The adultery was as proven as adultery ever gets, and so the law did exactly what Patricia said it would. Her claim for alimony, the thing she'd counted on for 21 years, was barred. Gone. The judge weighed the misconduct in dividing things, and the split came down in my favor. The business stayed mine, free and clear. My trucks and my crew and my daddy's trade. I kept the house with the metal roof I put on myself. And the kids, who were old enough that the court listened to them, and old enough to have seen with their own eyes exactly how it all went down. Those kids stayed with me. I'll tell you about a moment with my son that I keep, because it's the one that tells me I did it right. A few weeks after everything settled, Ben and I were up on a roof together on a Saturday, him handing me bundles, learning the trade the way I learned it from my daddy. We were quiet a long while, the way men get quiet when they work together. And then out of nowhere he said, "Dad, that night at the hospital, why didn't you go off on that guy?" I thought about it a good minute, the way you do when your boy asks you something that's really a question about how to be a man. And I told him, "Son, anybody can swing when they're hurt. That's the easy thing. The hard thing, the strong thing, is to stand there with the worst of it happening to you and not let it make you into something less than what your kids need you to be." I told him I didn't stay calm because I wasn't angry. I was angrier than I'd ever been in my life. I stayed calm because he and his sister were watching. And because the man who keeps his head is the man who keeps his house. He nodded and handed me another bundle, and we never talked about it again. But I saw it land in him, and that was worth more to me than anything the judge gave me. And the karma, the part where it all comes back around, came without my lifting a hand to push it. Derek, the nurse, the man holding my wife's hand in the place they both worked, found out what every affair finds out when the doors get blown open and the daylight comes in. It could not survive being real. Once it was out, once there was no secret to make it exciting and no settlement money coming to make it comfortable, once it was just two people who'd burned down two lives standing in the wreckage of it, he was gone. He had his own marriage that came apart over it, his own mess at that hospital where everybody now knew. He did not ride off into a new life with my wife. The thing they'd lit everything on fire for turned out to be made of nothing but the dark it had been hiding in. Tonya ended up alone, in a rented place, with the part-time job and none of the support she'd assumed. The life she'd torn the roof off of gone, and nothing built in its place. I took no joy in it. I'll be honest with you, I'd have rather none of it had ever happened at all, but I did not cause any of it. She did. I just refused to keep paying for it. I won't pretend I came through clean and proud and whole. There were nights, after the kids were asleep, I sat out in my shop with the trucks and grieved 21 years and a woman I thought I knew. And I had to own my piece of it, because a man always has a piece. I'd been so proud of providing, so proud of the long days and the hard money and the best roof in the county, that I'd stopped going home to my marriage and started just sleeping in it. I left it sitting up there, unmaintained for years, telling myself it was fine because the lights were on and the bills were paid. And a man whose whole trade is knowing that water finds the smallest gap you stop watching should have known better than anybody. I didn't cause her to do what she did. That was hers. But I'd quit checking my own roof a long time before the ceiling fell. The grief surprised me with its shape. I expected to grieve her, and I did. But more than that, I grieved the two kids in the cold truck 20 years back, who thought they were building something that would last their whole lives. I grieved being a husband, which is a thing I was good at once and was proud of being. And I grieved, strangely, the man I'd let myself become without noticing. The one who'd convinced himself that bringing home the money was the same as bringing home himself. They are not the same thing. A wife doesn't need a roof over her head from a man who's never under it with her. I learned that too late to save the marriage. I've tried to make sure I didn't learn it too late to be a better father and a better man for whoever might come down the road. You can't unrot a deck, but you can promise yourself you'll never again look away from a stain because looking is hard. So here's what a tired roofer would tell you tonight, for whatever it's worth. The leak is never where the stain is. You look up at the brown rings spreading on your ceiling, and every instinct in you says the hole's right there. And it isn't. The water got in somewhere higher, somewhere you can't see from down in the room. And it ran downhill in the dark and came out where it pleased. If you patch the stain, you'll feel better for about a season, and then the whole thing will come down on you worse than before. So when you see the first mark on the ceiling of something you love, don't paint over it. Get up there. Find where the water really got in, even if it's a long way from where it hurts. The truth is almost never standing where the damage is. I've still got my crew and my trucks and my name on the side of them. Maddie went off to college that fall, and I drove her there myself. And my boy and I put a new roof on a widow's house for free that spring just because we could. The house with the metal roof is quieter now, but it's dry, and it's honest, and it's mine. Tell me where you're standing when you hear this. And tell me, if you'd been left in that lobby in front of your kids, could you have stayed the man you wanted them to see? I believe more of you could than think you could. Go up and check the roof on the things you love, while the stain is still small. By the time it shows, the water's been getting in a long, long time.